you are all feeling the pain of the shooting in New Zealand as well. And so I was looking for prayers that spoke to the idea of peace and unity. And so I think this is a good concept. It's not perfect, but it was actually written the day after September 11th, after the 9/11. So anyway, so it says, wage peace with your breath. Breathe in firemen and rubble. Breathe out whole buildings and flocks of red-winged blackbirds. Breathe in terrorists and breathe out sleeping children and freshly mown fields. Breathe in confusion and breathe out maple trees. Breathe in the fallen and breathe out lifelong friendships intact. Wage peace with your listening, hearing sirens. Pray loud. Remember your tools, flower seeds, clothespins, clean rivers. Make soup. Play music. Memorize the words for thank you in 3 languages. Learn to knit and make a hat. Think of chaos as dancing raspberries. Imagine grief as the outbreath of beauty or the gesture of fish. Swim for the other side. Wage peace. Never has the world seemed so fresh and precious. Have a cup of tea and rejoice. Act as if armistice has already arrived. Celebrate today.
Amen. Let's give Jody a round of applause. Thank you so much. So once again, top of the morning to you, everybody. I'm excited about St. Paddy's Day. I come from an Irish background, so this is a fun day for me. So filled with lots of beer and good greasy food. It's amazing. So how about the music today again? I know, right? So much fun. So we're gonna dive right in. And I'm going to try to connect several points today, and I think I did it okay, but I was up late last night, so we'll see how this goes. All right, it says this. Then he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants to collect from them his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent another slave to them. This one they beat over the head and insulted. Then he sent another, and that one they killed. And so it was with many others. Some they beat, and others they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. Finally he sent him to them, saying, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they seized him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. But they realized that he had told this parable against them. They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd, so they left him and went away. So who's feeling up to share what they talked about in their group?
Well, I haven't pondered this one for a while. But I'm going to go extra radical today.
Awesome.
Give it a Marxist analysis.
Oh, there we go.
Marxists have this idea of accumulation through dispossession. And so at the very beginning of this parable, I think the impulse, especially in an American capitalist setting, is to view the tenants as the bad guys. Whereas the original bad guy is the guy who goes and dispossesses and puts a fence and builds a vineyard. And then it attempts to expropriate the wealth created by the peasants in his vineyard. And ultimately, if the parable was looked at as essentially a parable describing the collaborating religious authorities in Jerusalem, that is, there's the vineyard owner is the bad guy here, and the tenants are simply trying to keep the wealth they themselves have created.
I like it. I like it. I was not going to go there at all. That's very interesting. I like that. I like that. What else we got? Yes.
Well, at the end of this, what I take from it is the 1%er is not afraid, but hears a group more than one individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the tenants or the slaves unite, there would be more equity rather than the usury and stealing people that are in poverty and have no voice.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Anna, what you got?
Well, a little bit off of what Ernie said, talking about the landlord being someone of bad guy. How much of a good guy can you be?
Yeah.
It was like, hey, look, here's a murderous mob. I'm going to send person, slave after slave, they have no incentive to go be murdered by that. And then did he really go above the some? Like, here's this murderous group, now I'm going to send slave after slave after slave. They keep showing a purpose, now I'm going to send my son.
Yeah.
Like, how good of a person has it been?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of things in the Bible that make you scratch your head. Like, that's one of them for me too. These are great observations. I was not going to go here. You didn't steal my point. You took it a different direction, and I like where you went. I like your point better than mine, actually. So I'll take one more. I think we got enough time. Anybody? Yes.
Different direction. So the tenants are like their job is to care for the land, right? To take care of it. And instead they're like, well, we can just own it. Like rather than acknowledge that it's our job to take care of it, right? Why don't we just ignore that and pretend like we own it and do whatever we want to? So it's like the idea of like abusing the responsibilities that you're given and acting like you do it.
Yep. And that was the direction I kind of took it to this week. So I think either way, though, whether my perspective will be right or Bernie's, I think they're both brilliant points. And I think it's abundantly clear either way that Jesus was criticizing religious institution in this passage, big time. Jesus was criticizing what the temple had become, and Jesus was, in essence, demanding a new reformation. And I think it's high time that we do the same thing today. After the events of last week. Hatred, bigotry, and racism have become defining characteristics of who we are as a people of faith, and that's not okay with me. Even many characters in church history that we celebrate today were religious extremists, and I kind of wonder why we continue to celebrate those folks. Folks like St. Patrick. Now, I'm Irish on both sides. So this story is very important to me because what I was told growing up is not a historically accurate depiction of who St. Patrick was.
He wasn't Irish.
Yeah, it wasn't Irish. That was the first point I was going to make. So no, it's okay. Somebody had to steal my point. I was going to feel weird if somebody didn't. So that was good. So like the parables of Jesus, many myths in the church are built around metaphor in church history. And firstly, like Sarah said, St. Patrick was not from Ireland. Patrick was born in 4th century Roman Britain. And secondly, many people believe that Patrick was captured by pagan pirates and was forced to live in slavery as a stable hand in Ireland, where Patrick supposedly converted to Christianity while in captivity, just mystically this happened, escaped 6 years later to return to Britain, and with the church's permission, took many workers back to Ireland and evangelized the entire island of Ireland to become Christians. Now, all of that was bullshit. We're going to get to that in a second. Thirdly, the really fantastical part of the legend that is St. Patrick is that Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland. Okay, now this is where we get to the fabricated bullshit in this story, right? Welcome to another episode of Christopher Ruins Everything in church. So, first off, we know that the captivity story is likely false because immediately after Patrick's return from slavery, Patrick was on trial with the church. Now, we don't know exactly what for, but some historians have a pretty good guess of what Patrick was on trial for. They were accusing these clerics, Patrick, of lying about being a slave in Ireland in order to acquire funding and power from the church to go and colonize Ireland. Now, if you know anything about the church, you know that that's not unlike what they used to do at all. And if you think about it, the story of Patrick just didn't add up at all. He was a young 16-year-old that converted to Christianity while in pagan captivity somehow, and as a young adult with no knowledge of how to sail a boat and without any funding to buy a boat, somehow made his way back to Britain from Ireland. So what the hell actually happened here? Patrick's grandfather was a priest in modern-day Wales, and many people think that Patrick went to stay with him for 6 years. And the Ireland story of slavery was concocted by Patrick's grandfather so Patrick could go get the funding necessary for the church's financial support to colonize Ireland, because Patrick's grandfather had wanted to do this for years and years and years. Now, the snakes in the legend that were driven out of Ireland were not animals, y'all. They were people. They were Celtic, pagan, polytheist. And under Patrick's authority, the church unjustly killed pagans if they refused to convert to Christianity. So of course, the entire Ireland converted, quote unquote, willingly. It was not willingly. The story of Ireland was not one of willing conversion. It was one of hateful genocide. And the historical devil known as St. Patrick is especially important today after we've seen the events in New Zealand. This Christian terrorist this past week wrote an 87-page manifesto that said he wanted to cleanse New Zealand of Muslim influence. He admired white supremacy and terrorists, and he wanted to start a civil war in the United States with his actions. He wrote the names of mass murderers and locations of mass shootings on the barrels and stocks of his guns. He had a helmet that had the words, "Let's get this party started," written on it. And he killed almost 49 people and injured dozens more with no remorse whatsoever. And after the shooting, he said that his only regret, this bastard's only regret, was that he did not burn the mosque to the ground before he left. Now, the cherry on top of the shit Sunday was he stated that he admired our president, Donald Trump. I will say this. I greatly admire New Zealand for taking immediate action to clamp down on gun control and state that white supremacists do not have a place of belonging in our world. And I enforce that in this church today. In comparison, if you compare the actions of New Zealand to clamp down on gun control to the United States averaged a school shooting every 2 weeks in 2018, and we refused to do shit about this problem. And our president did not even have the moral fortitude, the integrity to harshly condemn Christian terrorism and white supremacy, because he knows that they're a sizable portion of his constituency. That is bullshit. But white supremacy and Christian terrorism did not start with Donald Trump. So don't hear that today. It did not start with Patrick, but it did start with Christianity. And it has been perpetuated by our faith for far too long. Present-day Islamophobia has also become prevalent again because of the church's influence around the world. I remember years back, the pulpit of every church I worked for had been used to whip Christians into a frenzy about Islam. This intolerant ideology was and is a national epidemic. The church's fear-based propaganda works so effectively that a majority of the evangelical Christian populace endorsed the criminal campaign of George W. Bush's war in the Middle East. And I regret that I, like many other Christians, lapped this grotesque teaching up like a whipped dog. And this vicious ideology is still apparent at evangelical 9/11 memorial worship services that go on around the country every year. American Christians still convene on the Sabbath and honor the 2,997 lives taken from America on September 11th. And though I do not mean to diminish that loss at all, it is perplexing that what you do not hear from evangelical pulpits is everyone or anyone discussing the approximate 244,000 civilians killed in the Middle East as a result of the American military. Virtually no one in evangelical communities discuss the 10 million refugees that are a direct result of America's war on terror. In the United States, we call Islam terrorism, but in the Middle East, Americans actually are the terrorists. And I still remember back in the day during our 9/11 worship service at the Six Flags Over Jesus church that I worked at. It was a Trump supporter wet dream come true, y'all. It was complete with American flag bulletins and red, white, and blue stage lighting. We used F-16 fighter jets depicted in video clips to encourage our congregation to pray for our troops and to claim their Second Amendment rights. That's how awful it was, y'all. We designed 3D digital assault rifles in the shape of a cross for the background screen for parishioners to be reminded of their Second Amendment right. We played videos that compared Jesus dying for our sins to modern day American soldiers dying on the field of battle. We had actors that played ghosts of 9/11 victims and emergency responders, and these performers notified our congregation, I'll never forget this, that all American heroes died in vain if we don't fight the nation of Islam as one Christian nation under God. Talk about toxic theology. And it's not isolated to that church. This logic is still common in so many churches today. If evangelical fundamentalists erroneously believe that America was founded as a Christian nation, I don't believe that it was, but they do, then someone should remind them that the Bible says to love our enemies, not bomb the hell out of their entire village. True Christianity is supposed to provide help for strangers, orphans, and widows, not create more orphans and widows. There's a passage in Luke 10, and it talks about the Good Samaritan. And I think this passage is important this week for the church. It says this: just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by the struggling man to the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near to him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more that you spend on his care." Jesus said this: "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed his mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now in the Talmud, the Samaritans are called Kuthians. And the term is derived from the city Kutha, which is geographically located in modern-day Iraq. And Samaritanism is similar to Judaism, and it shares much of the same sacred text. The most notable differences between them are that Samaritans believe that Mount Gerizim is God's chosen city, not Jerusalem. And Samaritans also maintain a different variation of the 10 Commandments. If you were to compare Samaritanism with Judaism, you would find that they are both extremely similar to one another. Kind of like the 3 major Abrahamic faiths of today are very similar to one another: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. This tension between faiths is why the parable of the Samaritan is so interesting. There was a lot of hatred exchanged between the differing Abrahamic faiths during the time of Christ, and some beliefs were more contentious to the Jewish community than others, and Samaritanism was a top contender for the most loathed heretics of that age. Now, in that same vein, Islam is tragically the most reviled of the 3 Abrahamic faiths in the world, in the realm of evangelicalism today. And it's the reason why so many Christians are anti-Palestine. Even with irrefutable evidence that the Palestinian people are being oppressed by Israeli legislation and occupation, many Christians support Israel no matter what they do. In fact, the largest American lobby for pro-Israeli policy, AIPAC, is largely funded by Christian Zionists. Now, Christian Zionism is the belief that the state of Israel is to have full control of Palestine in accordance with their interpretation of biblical prophecy. And some believe that Israel having control of the Holy Land is actually a prerequisite for the second coming of Jesus. And many Christian Zionists believe that America will be cursed, literally cursed, if we do not stand with Israel, regardless of whether their political agendas are ethical or not. Christian Zionists will stand with Israel's action no matter how morally wrong they are, and no matter how much they oppress the Muslim people of Palestine. This is why the opposition of Representative Omar was so reprehensible, and I'm talking to you two Democrats. Omar was not speaking anti-Semitism. Omar was speaking out against injustice and oppression. If anything, she was being anti-conservative evangelical. She was not being anti-Semitic. And girl, same, okay? Centuries of our bullshit in the church has made this mess in this world, and it's high time that we begin to clean it up. In fact, I would say that Omar condemning the Zionist lobbying groups, the AIPACs of this world, that was a lot like Jesus condemning the temple and modern establishment Democrats. And those folks that got so upset about Omar having the courage to speak up about these injustices, they reminded me of the priests that are offended by Jesus in the passage for daring to speak up against the injustices that were in the temple. In fact, in that knowledge, Representative Omar is a modern version of the Good Samaritan. And like Omar, give compassion to the oppressed church and speak truth to power. Go forth and do likewise. So in that knowledge, it's time to talk about application. How are you going to apply these truths in your world and in your community? That's awesome. One thing that I think about a lot is I think oftentimes we get wrapped up in trying to keep ourselves safe and secure so life can endure as long as possible, right? Because life's temporary. But I think oftentimes we do this and we forget that we're all going to go one day. Like I am, none of us are exempt from death. It's the one diagnosis that we all share, and it's terminal for everybody, right? Like it's coming for us, but we can choose how we go out. And if we go out by doing good in the world, then I think honestly it's worth it, in my opinion. So, what else we got? One more. Yes.
Well, you talking about that reminds me of, I was telling Allie about it. My lottery dream is to be able to buy a small apartment complex so my friends can afford to live here. But I also wanted to leave place for people that were homeless. I want a safe injection site and stuff like that, if that ever was to happen. And when I tell most people that story, their response is something like, well, that would make your apartment complex dangerous. That would do this, that, or the other thing. And I ended up having these kinds of conversations with my mother, and she's like, I would love to do that, but what if they came into our house? What if they did this? And it's just, because you're going, my mother's an amazing person. She's one of the most caring people I know in my life, but that's still what she thinks of hers. And maybe it's because she wants to protect my sister, me, and my nephew, but at the same time, I look at it as that whole, we are all closer to being homeless than we are closer to being billionaires.
Yeah, much closer.
And so, if we're doing that in that regard, she would want someone to do that for me. And I would want someone to do that for my sister and my nephew and my parents and everything like that. But I'm not going to say it's not something I still fear. Like, so it's that whole fear is not or courage is not the lack of fear, but acting in spite of it. And which is kind of what we were talking about when it came to the mass murder, with the guy that chased him down. Did it because of his kids. He's probably terrified, but he was courageous in spite of it because he wanted to take care of somebody. And that somebody in this case was his fellow worshipers in his children.
Amen.
I don't know if that made any sense.
It did. No, that was really good. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
I kind of babbled for a minute.
No, that was awesome. I love it. I love it. Yes.
Well, because when you fear, I mean, I think this is one of the things that often they want us to be afraid. Fear is this big thing, you know. Oh, I can't do that because I'm afraid, and it's working. So.
And have you noticed that in America, at least and I could say this as a white person, at least in our families, we're selectively fearful. You've noticed that? Like, I talk to a lot of people that are fearful of homeless people for no reason, and they're fearful of immigrants for no reason. They're fearful of undocumented citizens for no reason. They're terrified of Muslims for no reason. But at the same time, despite the evidence that every mass murder lately has been committed by white supremacists, they won't say a damn thing to their aunt and uncle at the potluck about being racist or about being Islamophobic. And that's what we've got to change. The dangerous people are there, but they're not who we're calling out right now. The dangerous people that we're trying to coddle and appease are white supremacists. So, and if I said that anybody in here is a white supremacist, I'm sorry, you're dangerous people. You're dangerous people, and I don't apologize for that. Yes?
So while we're going on the news, is a bigger demographic that's the main problem. Is it possible that news of other atrocities by other demographics are being suppressed?
That you're saying atrocities by other demographics are being suppressed? No, I don't think it is possible. I think that's a narrative that the right is throwing out, the fake news narrative a lot. And honestly, I see that on the left too sometimes. I see the whole fake news accusation. And the statistics of people that are in those communities committing crimes or mass murders is nothing compared to white supremacists. Nothing. But I think in this country, white supremacy is so part of American culture that when you bring up being anti-racism or anti-white supremacist, people think you're anti-American. That's how you know it's a problem, right?
You get you're racist towards white people.
Yeah. No, it doesn't work like that.
There's that whole thing of where it's when it's a white person that does it, we don't call out white supremacy. What we do is go, it's a lone wolf. He was such a great guy. Look at him. He was backpacking after his dad died.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally what people would cover.
Yeah.
This man who killed 49 people.
And injured dozens more.
Yeah, and some of them critically, like the
Yeah.
Okay, so 50 now.
Yeah.
Like,
It's bonus.
and it's still like, well, we don't know yet. And they put a picture of him as a child on the
Yeah.
newspaper.
Trying to humanize.
Yeah, they try to humanize this legitimately awful human being.
Yeah.
And I mean, with your hero, because one of his heroes that he wrote about was the Norwegian mass murderer who killed a bunch of children because they were at a socialist summer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he name-checked that guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a good person.
No.
I mean, your trauma is not an excuse
Exactly.
for you being awful.
I agree.
Because plenty of people overcome the same trauma
Mhm.
in life.
I agree. I think, to piggyback off of what you said too, do I think transformation is possible? Absolutely. I'm living proof of that. But transformation would have been impossible if somebody would not have called me on my bullshit. And I think what led to this killer was somebody trying to coddle him and make him feel welcome with his beliefs. That's got to stop. People can be welcome, but their beliefs don't have to be, y'all. And because of that, I've got some words for the church, and this is what they are. Dear pastors, priests, bishops, and reverends, we must admit that white supremacy began in Christendom, and these terrorists have been babied in our churches for far too long. It is our weekly responsibility, it is our daily responsibility to condemn racism and bigotry from the pulpit until these values are completely eradicated in the world. The hatred of people of color and Muslims is not something that can be tolerated anymore in faith communities, period. This shit started with my faith, and I'll be damned if it continues on my watch. And in the face of hatred, love must always, always be louder, and it's time for the church to start making some fucking noise. White supremacy, Islamophobia, Christian Zionism is what led to this week's attack. You can deny it all day, every day, but it's not true. And it's time for the church to take responsibility in removing racism from society. It's time for the church to be uncomfortable with their families and friends and call out this shit the moment it's uttered. It's time to make racist and bigots and all forms of intolerant belief systems uncomfortable when they are around us and when they are in society. We love everyone. We don't have to accept their beliefs. We don't. And it's time the church stops playing these games with these people. At this church, let me be clear, we stand with New Zealand, we stand with Muslims, we stand against all forms of extremisms, and we will stand against and between white supremacists. I invite you today not just to take wholesome thoughts with you into the community, but to shape the world with every step that you make courageously. When you encounter intolerance, when you encounter hatred, when you encounter violence, I don't invite you to just look at that situation and think to yourself, that's wrong. Do something about it. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? Until next week, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you, and may it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. And when you leave these, let's make a difference, y'all. Grace and peace.